You're at a cookout in June, a coworker's backyard, string lights, a cooler somebody keeps refilling with ice. Someone you went to high school with, a guy named Colton Fairweather, is telling a story about the truck he just financed. 68 months, a payment that made the finance manager whistle a little when he said it out loud. Everyone at the table laughs at the whistle part. It's a good story. He tells it well. You eat your burger and don't mention that you drove here in a car you bought used 4 years ago and haven't thought about since, or that you spent the drive over half listening to a podcast about index funds instead of music, or that there's a number sitting in an account nobody at this cookout has ever heard of that grew by more this year than Colton's truck is worth. You picture wealth as a moment. A number hits a screen, confetti falls, somebody hands you a key to something. That's not how it happens. It happens in a version of your life that looks almost exactly like it does right now. Same apartment, same commute, same Tuesday. The only thing different is a handful of small decisions running quietly in the background that nobody, including you most days, is paying attention to. There are 7 of these signs. Most people who have them don't know they have them, and most people chasing wealth are looking for something louder than this. So let's go through what it actually looks like, one ordinary week at a time. Sign 1. You automated the part of your income you never let yourself see. It's a Thursday night, and you're standing in your kitchen with the fridge open longer than it needs to be. Not really looking for anything, just standing there because the day is finally over. Your phone buzzes on the counter. Payroll deposit, $2,140. You don't open the app. You already know what it's going to say because you built it that way on purpose 11 months ago. Here's what actually happened to that $2,140 before you ever saw it as spendable money. $310 left before it landed, straight into a Roth IRA, an automatic contribution you set up the same week you got hired. Another $150 peeled off into a separate savings account with a name you picked specifically so you wouldn't recognize it as your money when you're scrolling through your accounts looking for something to spend. You called it roof and furnace, boring on purpose. Money doesn't get spent on things that sound like maintenance. Your coworker, a guy named Trevor Haslinger, sits 2 cubicles down and got the same direct deposit today. You know because he mentioned it at lunch, the same way he mentions most things, like it's already decided. He's already looked at a smartwatch he's been wanting, the kind that tracks everything, $429 before tax. He said the raise basically pays for it if you think about it the right way. You didn't say anything. You've learned there's no version of that conversation that doesn't sound like judgment, even when it isn't. You didn't always do it this way. At 23, you got your first real raise, $3,200 a year, and you spent the better part of 6 months waiting to feel richer. You didn't. You just noticed the new gym membership, the streaming bundle, the slightly nicer parking spot closer to your building, all quietly eating the exact amount the raise had added. 18 months later, you were making more money than you'd ever made and somehow had less breathing room the year before. That's the part nobody explains to you early enough. A raise doesn't create margin by itself. It only creates the opportunity for margin, and most of that opportunity gets spent before it's ever counted. So this time you did something different. You let the automation run before you were even conscious of the money existing. Right now, on your screen, the number reads $2,140. What's actually usable after the transfer's already fired is $1,680. You never budgeted the difference away. You never white-knuckled through a spreadsheet on a Sunday night feeling deprived. The money simply never showed up as yours to spend in the first place. Currently, the average American saves somewhere under 6 cents of every dollar earned. You're closer to 15. Not because you make dramatically more than average, you don't. Your salary is $71,000, solidly ordinary for your field and your city. The difference isn't the income. It's that the gap between what comes in and what goes out was decided once, automated, and then left completely alone. 2 weeks later, a second transfer notification comes through while you're brushing your teeth. $460 moved into the Roth. You glance at it, rinse your toothbrush, go to bed. That's the whole event. No fireworks. There's a specific moment 11 months ago that made this stick, and it wasn't dramatic either. You were filling out the direct deposit form for the new job, the one where you split your paycheck across multiple accounts instead of letting it all land in one place first. The HR rep, a woman named Carol, who'd clearly walked 100 people through this same form, mentioned almost as an aside that most people never touch this setting once they set it. She said it like a piece of trivia. You heard it like a loophole. If most people said it once and forget it, then the version of you filling out this form right now was making a decision for every future version of yourself who'd otherwise be tempted to spend the difference. You split it 3 ways that afternoon: checking, Roth, and roof and furnace, and you haven't opened that form again since. That's what sign 1 actually feels like from the inside. Not a decision you make repeatedly, a decision you made exactly once, on a form in an HR office, with fluorescent lighting and a stack of other paperwork waiting, that keeps making itself every 2 weeks whether you remember making it or not. Sign 2, a number that used to terrify you, doesn't anymore. The email lands at 6:52 in the morning, while you're still in bed scrolling before your alarm actually goes off. Subject line, from your dentist's office. Balance due following your visit, $1,180.40. Root canal plus the crown they said might be needed and turned out to be needed. You read it once, you put the phone face down on the nightstand, you get up and make coffee. That's the entire reaction. A year and a half ago, that email would have rearranged your whole morning. You would have opened your banking app 3 separate times before 9 a.m. You would have done math in your head about which credit card had the lowest rate, whether you could split it into 2 payments without the office charging a fee, whether this was the month you finally had to dip into the emergency fund you kept promising yourself you'd stop dipping into. $1,180 used to be an event. Now it's an email. You call the office at lunch, not panicked, just efficient. The woman who answers, her name tag says Denise, pulls up your account and asks if you want to pay in full or set up installments. You tell her you'll just pay it now. She sounds mildly surprised, the way people sound when a bill gets handled without any negotiation attached to it. You give her the card number, you hang up, you go back to your sandwich. What made that possible isn't a big salary or a stroke of luck. It's an account you can barely remember opening. 22 months ago, you started transferring $175 every 2 weeks into a high-yield savings account, earning around 4.6%. You didn't do it because you had a plan for a root canal specifically. You did it because a financial advisor your cousin recommended told you the number everyone quotes: 3 to 6 months of expenses. And you decided to just start moving toward it without waiting until you felt ready. Currently, close to 4 in 10 Americans say they couldn't cover a $1,000 emergency without borrowing the money somehow: a credit card, a loan from a relative, something with interest attached, or a favor owed. When that gap doesn't exist, a surprise expense stays exactly the size it actually is. When the gap does exist, $1,180 becomes $1,180 plus the interest, plus the 2 months of feeling behind, plus the low hum of stress that follows you into meetings you're supposed to be focused on. Your sister calls that evening. This is unrelated. She just wants to talk. And somewhere in the conversation, she mentions her car needs $640 in repairs she wasn't expecting, and she's trying to figure out which bill to push back a month. You don't lecture her. You just listen, because you remember exactly what that felt like. And you know the difference between her Wednesday and yours isn't that you're smarter. It's that you started the transfers 22 months before she needed to. You think about the specific Sunday you opened that savings account, because it wasn't inspired by anything particularly wise. You'd just watched the coworker go through a rough stretch, a broken water heater followed 2 weeks later by a layoff scare that turned out to be a false alarm, but still cost him a sleepless month. And something about watching someone else's stress from a safe distance made the abstract advice suddenly feel specific. You didn't open the account with $5,000 sitting in it, ready to go. You opened it with $40, the smallest transfer the bank would let you automate, and doubled it every few months as you got more comfortable not seeing that money in checking. By month 14, you were moving $175 every 2 weeks without feeling it at all, the way a callus stops hurting long after the blister that caused it has healed. The balance right now sits at $9,240, comfortably past 3 months of your expenses and closing in on 4. You're not chasing 6 months anymore, not urgently. The dentist bill barely moved the needle. That's the actual return on 22 months of $175, not a number that changed your life in one dramatic instant, but a number that made an entire category of bad Wednesdays stop being bad. Sign 3. You turned something down you could genuinely afford. The group chat lights up on a Sunday evening with a screenshot from your friend Priyanka, who's getting married in October and has found a bachelorette trip to Savannah. 4 nights, a rented house of a pool, and a private chef for one of the dinners. The total comes out to $1,340 per person once flights are factored in. You have $1,340. That's not actually the question you're sitting with. The question, and this is new for you, is what else that $1,340 could become, and whether you can live with the version of yourself who says no to Savannah in order to find out. You don't answer right away. You make tea, you come back to your phone 20 minutes later, and the group chat has moved on to arguing about which house has better reviews. Nobody's pressuring you specifically. That's the strange part. The pressure isn't coming from Priyanka or anyone in the chat. It's ambient. It's the assumption sitting underneath the whole conversation that of course you're going, because that's what having the money means. You spend it when the invitation shows up. You used to operate exactly that way, not as a conscious philosophy, just as a reflex. Money arrived, opportunities to spend it arrived at roughly the same pace, and the two things matched up automatically, the way a thermostat responds to temperature. What's different now is there's a pause where there didn't used to be one, a few seconds where you ask yourself something like, does this get me closer to the thing I'm actually trying to build, or does it just feel good for 4 days in Georgia? For Savannah, the answer doesn't come back clean. So on Monday, you text Priyanka privately. Tell her you're thrilled for her and you're going to sit this one out financially. You'll be there for the wedding itself. She sends back a heart and a no worries at all. The group chat never mentions it again. You take the $1,340 you would have spent and split it. $900 into your brokerage account, $440 staying in checking as a small cushion for the month. The whole transfer takes about 3 minutes. Nothing marks the moment. No one congratulates you. The market doesn't move. You just know, privately, that you did it. This is what people misunderstand about the version of discipline that actually holds up long term. It isn't deprivation. You wanted Savannah, the pool, the chef, 4 days of not thinking about anything. You wanted it and you turned it down anyway, because somewhere underneath the wanting there was a clearer want that mattered more, and you'd already done the math on which one you'd regret losing in 5 years. Sign 4. You canceled something small and nobody, including you, noticed it was gone. It's a Sunday afternoon, raining, and you're doing the thing you do maybe twice a year, going through your bank statement line by line instead of just glancing at the total. 3 streaming services you can name immediately why you have. A fourth one, $13.99 a month, that you genuinely cannot place. You open the app, it's a workout program you signed up for during a 2-week burst of motivation 14 months ago. You used it 4 times. You've paid for it 17 times. You cancel it. It takes 90 seconds, a confirmation screen that asks if you're sure in a slightly guilt-tripping tone. Your progress will be lost message that almost makes you laugh, because there was no progress to lose. You confirm. That's $167.88 a year that was leaving your account for something that stopped mattering to you over a year ago and never told anyone, including you, that it had stopped mattering. You keep going. A subscription botch for coffee beans you liked fine but didn't love enough to justify $34 a month when the grocery store 3 blocks away sells beans you like almost as much for less than half that price. Canceled. A cloud storage upgrade you bought 2 years ago for a work project that ended 18 months ago. Canceled. By the time you closed the laptop, you found $61 a month, $732 a year that was leaving quietly, automatically, without a single decision behind it after the original sign-up. Your roommate, a guy named Oscar Bramwell, walks through the living room while you're doing this and asks what you're up to. You tell him. He laughs and says he probably has 10 of those. He doesn't go check. Most people don't go check, not because they're careless, but because subscriptions are specifically built to be invisible after the first month. That's the entire business model. Nobody gets rich charging you once, they get rich charging you automatically forever until you notice. You don't do anything dramatic with the $732 you just freed up. You don't reward yourself with something else that costs $732. You let it fold back into the automated transfer from Sign 1, the one that already runs before you see the money. The transfer amount goes from $460 a month to $521. You update one number in one setting screen. Nothing else in your life visibly changes. A month later, you do the same exercise with your phone plan, mostly out of curiosity this time rather than necessity. You've been on the same carrier for 6 years on a plan that made sense when it was 2 lines and now covers just you. A 20-minute call, most of it on hold, drops your bill from $94 to $58. The rep offers you a loyalty discount you apparently qualified for the entire time, but were never told, because the incentive for a company to volunteer that information is exactly 0. Another $36 a month, another $432 a year gone from the outflow column without you losing anything you were actually using. None of this required willpower in the way people usually mean it. You didn't grit your teeth through a Friday night wanting to buy something and refusing. You just spent 2 rainy afternoons across 2 different months looking closely at things you'd stopped looking at, and the money that had been leaking out through habit and inattention simply stopped leaking. That's the whole win. Not addition, subtraction that nobody, including you, most days remembers happened. Sign 5. Your money made more than you did last month and you didn't do anything to cause it. You opened the investment app on a Tuesday night, mostly out of habit, the way you might check the weather without needing to go outside. You started this account 19 months ago on a Sunday afternoon that took maybe 35 minutes total. Linked your checking, picked the low-cost fund tracking the total US stock market, scheduled $400 to move automatically on the 3rd of every month. You closed the laptop and made dinner. That was genuinely the entire origin story. Since then, you've thought about the account maybe a dozen times. Once when a coworker, the same Trevor from Sign 1, mentioned he'd been buying and selling individual stocks based on things he reads online, checking prices during meetings, having strong opinions about companies you've never heard of. You nodded and didn't say much. Once in a stretch last year when the market dropped almost 8% over 3 weeks and your phone filled up with news alerts you didn't ask for. You opened the app, Solve's number was down, closed the app, and let the $400 transfer on schedule like nothing had happened, because nothing that mattered had happened. Tonight, the number on the screen is $9,847. You've contributed $7,600 total across 19 months. The rest, a little over $2,200, showed up without you doing a single additional thing past the original setup. That's the part that still catches you a little when you actually sit with it. Money you didn't work for sitting next to money you did, and at a glance, you genuinely can't tell which is which anymore. You remember spending most of that original 35 minutes not on the transfer amount, which you decided in about 90 seconds, but on which fund to actually buy, scrolling through options with names that all sounded confident and none of which meant much to you at the time. You almost picked something your cousin mentioned once, a fund built around a handful of trending technology companies, mostly because the name sounded exciting and the 3-year return chart looked steep and satisfying. You didn't, mostly out of laziness more than wisdom, and went with the boring total market option instead because the fee was lower and the description was 1 sentence long. That lazy decision turned out to be the entire strategy. Boring, broad, and cheap, held without interruption, has quietly outperformed most of the exciting ideas your cousin has mentioned since. $400 a month for 25 years at a conservative long-run average lands somewhere around $380,000. At a more historically typical average, it's closer to $550,000. You will have personally contributed $120,000 of that. The rest arrives from time doing the only thing time is actually good at, which is compounding whatever you refuse to interrupt. Trevor sold most of his individual stock positions during that 8% drop last year, convinced there was more coming. There wasn't. He bought back in 4 months later at a higher price than where he sold. He mentioned it once at lunch, the way people explain a decision they're still quietly working through. He hasn't brought it up since. You didn't bring it up either. You just kept transferring $400 on the 3rd of every month, the way you have for 19 months, the way you will for however many more it takes. Sign 6. A number you weren't tracking crossed the line you weren't watching for. It's a Saturday morning in March, coffee still brewing, and for no particular reason, you open the spreadsheet you update maybe 4 times a year, whenever the mood strikes you. Checking, $2,890. Savings, roof and furnace, $9,240. Brokerage, $9,847. Retirement accounts combined, $19,600. Remaining balance on your car loan, negative $6,100. Remaining student loan balance, negative $11,300. You do the subtraction slowly, the way you do math you're a little nervous about. The total lands at $24,177. You pull up the same spreadsheet from 8 months earlier, back in July. That number was $9,640. You sit with both numbers for a second, not celebrating exactly, just looking at them the way you'd look at 2 photographs of the same street taken in different seasons, close enough to recognize, different enough to notice. The difference is $14,537 in 8 months. You didn't get a bonus, you didn't inherit anything, nothing dramatic happened in those 8 months that you could point to and say, that's the reason. You just kept doing the same quiet things every single month. The automated transfer, the emergency fund nobody sees, the Savannah trip you didn't take, the $61 a month in subscriptions you don't pay anymore, the $400 that moves into the market on the 3rd whether you're paying attention or not. And the number moved anyway without asking your permission, without announcing itself, without a single Tuesday feeling any different than the Tuesday before it. This is the sign most people never actually reach, not because it takes more discipline than the other 5, but because it requires measuring something different entirely. Most people track their financial life by what lands in their checking account every 2 weeks. Income becomes the whole scoreboard, and when income grows slowly or doesn't grow at all in a given year, it feels like nothing is happening, like standing still on a floor that's actually moving. Currently, roughly half of Americans couldn't tell you their net worth within a reasonable range if you asked them directly. Not because they don't care, but because nobody ever taught them to look at that number specifically, and because the first time you calculate it, it usually feels too small to take seriously. $24,177 doesn't sound like wealth. It doesn't sound like something you'd bring up at a dinner table. But $24,177 that grew by $14,537 in 8 months is a completely different object than $24,177 sitting still. One of those is a balance. The other one is a direction. And direction, held long enough, is the only thing that actually compounds. You think back to the first time you ever built a spreadsheet, almost 3 years ago now, sitting at the same kitchen table with a number that came out negative, about 4,300 underwater once you counted the student loans and a credit card balance you'd been carrying since a rough stretch after college. You remember staring at that negative number for a while. Not devastated exactly, just sobered, the way you feel when a doctor tells you a number from a routine blood work panel that isn't an emergency, but isn't nothing either. You didn't fix it that week, you just started the habit of looking at it every few months instead of never. And somewhere across 3 years and roughly a dozen updates to that same spreadsheet, negative 4,300 became positive $24,177, one ordinary quarter at a time, without a single update along the way that felt significant while it was happening. Trevor, if you're wondering, doesn't track his net worth at all. He mentioned it once, almost as a joke, that he genuinely has no idea what the number would be if he added everything up. You didn't say anything about that either. You just closed the spreadsheet, poured the coffee, and let your Saturday keep going, the way it always does. Ordinary from every angle, quietly further ahead than it was 8 months ago, and nobody, including the person living it most days, fully aware that it's happening. Sign 7. You stopped keeping score against people whose scoreboard you can't actually see. Back to that cookout in June. Colton's still going, now describing the truck's sound system, and somewhere in the last 10 minutes, the conversation has drifted from the truck to a coworker of his who apparently just put a down payment on a lake house. And you can feel the table doing the thing tables do at cookouts, quietly recalculating everyone standing against a number nobody actually confirmed. You used to play that game without noticing you were playing it. Somebody mentions a house, a trip, a bonus, and some part of your brain would immediately run the comparison, usually landing somewhere uncomfortable, usually followed by a small private resolution to catch up somehow. You don't do the math this time, not because you've become enlightened about money. You still like money. You still check your accounts more than you'd probably admit. It's that you've slowly stopped trusting the scoreboard everyone else seems to be reading from. Colton's truck payment is $780 a month for 68 months. You don't know that because he told you, he didn't. You know it because you asked a casual question about the interest rate 2 years ago at a different cookout and did the math later in your car. You don't know what's actually in his savings account, if there's anything in it at all, and neither does anyone else at this table, including, you'd guess, Trevor on his more honest days. Your neighbor, an older man named Walt Pruitt, who lives 2 doors down since before you moved in, drives a Corolla with a dent in the back bumper he's never bothered fixing, and wears the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation through most of the year. You found out completely by accident, mentioned in passing when he was helping you jump your battery last winter, that he retired at 59 and spends 4 months every year in a rental near the coast doing basically nothing. Nobody at the cookout would clock Walt as the wealthiest person within 6 blocks. Nobody would clock you that way either, and that's sort of the point. The comparison you used to run automatically, the one that measured your progress against whoever was loudest in the room that week, has quietly been replaced by a different one. Not how do I compare to Colton, but something more like, am I closer to where I was 8 months ago? That's it. That's the whole shift. It sounds almost too simple to matter, but it's the difference between a race that never ends because somebody's always going to have a nicer truck and the race against a version of yourself that's actually finishable, 1/4 at a time. You leave the cookout a little after 9. Colton's still talking about the sound system. You drive home in the 4-year-old car, windows down, no particular urgency. And you don't think about the truck again until you're writing this down for yourself weeks later, trying to remember what it felt like to sit at that table and simply not care about a comparison that used to run in the background of nearly every social interaction you had. If any of these sounded familiar, even one of them, you're probably further along than the number in your checking account is telling you. The wealth that actually lasts was never going to announce itself. It was always going to look exactly like this: a Tuesday that stays a Tuesday, a Thursday you almost don't notice, a Saturday morning spreadsheet nobody else will ever see. Subscribe if you want more of this, and I'll see you in the next one.